All right, welcome back. We're going to look at creating our own components today. I'm using the Create React App tool to quickly start a new React application. And let's see, I'm going to go ahead and change into that directory and open up Visual Studio Code. And as soon as it's done, I'm going to also change into there over here and run yarn start to get our application running. So one large advantage of React is building components. A component is basically a JavaScript class which has a render method. And what this means is it's going to allow us to basically create our own custom HTML tags. In fact, if we look at the index.js file, this is the file where we tell React DOM to render our application in the document. Well, notice that we're saying render app as an HTML tag. Well, that's because when we define the class app, it creates a component. And what a component is in React is essentially our own custom HTML tag. So let's change the app in here so that instead of displaying the image and a paragraph and an anchor tag, let's go ahead and make our own component. Let's make a component called status. I'm going to follow the same pattern as class app extends component. I'm going to say class status extends component. And I'm going to follow the same pattern again where they have a render function. And the render function returns a div with content inside of it. So here, I'm going to create a div with a paragraph tag with something like, wow, I had the most delicious lunch today. And I'm going to make another paragraph right below that with a button where people can press like. So what we've done here is we have defined a class. We called it status, and we said it extends this thing component, which we know comes from React. And what a component has is one function called render, which returns HTML. Remember that React uses a syntax which is about half JavaScript, half HTML. It's called JSX, and we can actually write HTML in line with our JavaScript. It's a fantastic syntax. So now let's use this new status component. We use it by simply writing a HTML tag, and we can give it the name of our component. So here I've made 4 instances of status, and we see them appear on the page right here. I don't exactly like the way that it looks like there must be a text-aligned center somewhere in here. So let's figure out where that's at. That's probably an app CSS. And yeah, it looks like there's the entire app is centered. The app header is centered. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all the text-aligned centers. Well, it looks like it was just that one. Great. I just didn't like that the button was centered there. So, what we have here is we just made just about the simplest of components. We made a component that has a room for paragraph of text and a room for a paragraph with a button in it. What I'm trying to make here is something like you might see on Twitter or on Facebook. Just a simple stream of statuses where people can press like to say that they've liked it. And the nice thing about components is it has encapsulated the structure of our status, and it allows us to reuse it. So one of the main benefits of React is that instead of writing the same HTML over and over and over again, we can actually break our application up into these different components and really reuse them. So, for instance, I've referred to the status 4 times down here, but I think it'd be nicer if we put a little box around these statuses, maybe a thin black outline and a white background. So let's try and write some CSS to change that for all of the statuses. Immediately, the nice part is that we don't have to edit it for each of the 4 statuses here because they're all defined in their own component. So I'm going to go to the div, and I'm going to say that this status has a class of status. And I'm going to check my terminal because I expected that to actually have an error. One error that it's actually telling me up here, it's not an error, it's a warning. It's telling us that this file has the import logo, but it's never used. And that's correct. We did have this file logo, and we deleted it. So I'm going to delete that import statement. That also explains why this whole line here was a little bit faded to begin with. Well, let's see. So I did just open up the developer tools. Let me open them via inspect here. So if we ever inspect the page, we can go to the console, and that might reveal some more errors in our application. Here we're seeing that it says invalid DOM property class. Did you mean class name? So I'm trying to show you this because it's a big gotcha. Although the JSS syntax allows us to combine HTML and JavaScript, there are certain things that we can't do. And one of the things we can't do is we can't use the word class. So in HTML and CSS, we would normally give a div a attribute like ID or class, but we can't do that here. The reason for that is this word class is actually a reserved word in JavaScript up here. So instead of saying class, we should actually say class name. And if we use the word class name, that will actually automatically map it back to what we expect it to be, an actual HTML class name. So if I change that and save it, we'll notice that the error disappeared over here. And if we look at the elements here, we can actually see in the source that each of these divs has the div class status, just like we would expect. So let's go to the CSS that we've imported and define some CSS for this status. So I'm going to go to the bottom of the file, and I'm going to say that our status, each of those should have a background color of white. The color of the text should be black, and let's give them a border of a solid black 1 pixel border. And we see those changes come in immediately over here. Might as well give them a margin and maybe a padding of 1 EM. How about maybe just 10 pixels? That looks like a bit much. Great. So now we've defined a little bit of CSS, and we've picked up those changes over here, and our site looks maybe a little better. And the big benefit here is that, again, we just wrote our first component, so we only had to define how this status was going to look once, and now we're able to reuse it all over the site. In the next videos, you'll see how we can add even more customizability to these components. So right now, our component is a little bit rigid because we have the same text in it every single time. But we're going to look how to use properties to pass in different text to it. And we'll look at how to attach this button so that when we click on it, we'll actually see something like a total number of likes increase. Hello. In the last video, we saw how to make our own status component and how to reuse that and how to add a class name instead of class to add some CSS properties to this. So the status component right now is fantastic because we're able to reuse it, but that doesn't make much sense for the type of component this thing is. We really want to show a lot of different statuses. So how we can do that is we can take advantage of what React calls props or properties. So just like we've made our own custom HTML tag, well, we can pass information into them. So I'm going to try and pass in some information like, oh, let's see here, my text. And I'm going to make up any sort of text that I want to pass into this component. For instance, the first text we had here was, wow, I had the most delicious lunch today. I'm going to cut that out and paste that as the text for just the first. Now I'm going to do, I'm going to make up different text for each of these different ones. So I'm going to say, there was no traffic today. Or I'm going to say my text, let's see, finally finished that big project. Or my text, happy to be learning React.js. So all of these statuses now are actually receiving text via what looks like an HTML attribute. As soon as I've saved that, all the text disappeared from our live hot reloaded website over here. Well, that's because we're not referring to that text anywhere within our component. In order to actually access that, what we need to do is access this property. Whenever we want to access or do something that's JavaScripty inside of HTML, we need to use these curly braces. Once these curly braces are here, we can start to interact with JavaScript. For instance, we can say 1 plus 1. So if you look at that on the page here, we're actually executing what's inside those curly braces as JavaScript, and it is rendering that to the page. For instance, we can also do 1 plus math.random. And if we add that, you see now we actually have different random numbers for each of these things. They're each being executed. Well, in order to access the properties for that, we can access this .props.myText. And just like that, we're actually able to refer to the myText attribute that was passed into this component, and now we can render it in that page. And I'm going to get rid of, oh, I thought I did get rid of the, I'm just getting rid of all the centering. There we go. So, in addition to creating our own components, we can also pass in properties like this. And we can make up whatever property we want and really just pass in just about anything we want here. But this is one way to actually pass in information to a component. You simply create the name of the property as if it were an HTML attribute. You can pass information into it, and the important thing is you access it via this .props, and you name it according to whatever you called it on the HTML component.